Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 4-game NBA slate for you. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Hope everybody did well yesterday. It was a pretty good slate. Had some good scores in NBA and in college basketball last night, so especially that Washington game. And the showdown. So let's go ahead and get into the slate, though. We have an interesting smaller slate here. I honestly don't like this slate very much. We have 4-game slate. I'm going to do this video a little bit differently than I have, and tell me what you think in the comments below, excuse me. And also make sure to check out the memberships and stuff like that for the full write-up for the slate. With that said, let's get into the 4-game slate. So we have the Knicks versus Boston, the Wizards versus Toronto, Chicago versus Milwaukee, and Cleveland versus Sacramento. So we have 2 slower down games and 2 upper tempo games. So let's go and get into this. We're going to start by looking at the New York Knicks. And I'm going to do DraftKings and FanDuel as I go through this, but I'm just going to show you the FanDuel, and I'll point out what I think about the DraftKings version of the same player when I get to them, if that's necessary. Looking at the Knicks, they do have a tough matchup here. It's Boston, and Boston tends to be a team that fantasy kills. There's really only one player that I like at all, and that's Julius Randle here on DraftKings at $8,100. And the reason I like him is because he's pretty steady for the most part, though he's had a couple of slowdown games. He did well in his first game of the year against Boston, where he had 45 fantasy points. If he can squeeze out a double-double, then he'll definitely have some potential. And he's done that in most games this year. He also didn't play as many minutes the last game. He only played 27 in a big win for them against Charlotte. So I think he's going to be, excuse me, pretty motivated to have a good game here. Obviously, it's going to be a tougher matchup, but the Knicks do tend to be a little bit better against the guards than versus the big guys, so he does draw some potential in this one, but it's still a pretty tough matchup for him. Over on FanDuel, he's about $200 more expensive, but he still has the same upside there. He's kind of a GPP play mostly on the slate, but he definitely has some upside on this situation. Looking at the Boston Celtics, they also have a tough matchup, obviously, going against the Knicks, though the Knicks have some defensive guys. They do tend to give up some points occasionally, and while they are tough, there's at least one play that I do like for Boston, and that is Drew Holiday. Now, he obviously has a lower floor due to the fact that this team has a lot of options on the team, but he's played pretty well in kind of the contrarian type of games. Even though he didn't have a great game against the Knicks to start the season, that was his first game with his team, and he definitely feels more comfortable now. I think his floor is higher because he's getting quite a lot of assists, and he's going to have some opportunity to get some steals and stuff in this game, though that does carry some risk. He definitely feels like a decent priced play on the slate, and so he's definitely playable because of the small slate aspect. Obviously, if it was a higher, if there was a lot of games on the slate, I probably would just avoid Boston altogether. On FanDuel, he's nearly the same price here, though his floor is actually a little bit higher there, so he's a little bit safer on the slate there, but he still has some good upside in both places. If I was going to go with an expensive player on this team, it would be Tatum, obviously. He's been the most consistent, but he still shares the ball a lot, so it's going to be hard for him to pay out. And then White has been pretty popular lately. His price is a little bit pricey for this matchup, so he's avoidable. Looking at the Wizards, now they are in a faster-paced game here, but they are expected to get blown out, and that is an issue with this game, as there is some risk of that blowout. And a couple of their guys are a little bit overpriced for this matchup. My favorite option, though, is Denny Avdija. Now, obviously, he does have a low floor, and he has been inconsistent. But if anybody on this team is going to do well, it's likely going to be him. He's been pretty decent in certain games, and this actually gives him some utility, though he just has a very, he's very inconsistent. So he's definitely a GPP play from that perspective. Looking at his FanDuel price is $400 cheaper than his DraftKings. He is priced a little bit better there, and he does have a little bit more potential with FanDuel scoring, but he still carries that risk and squarely a GPP play across the board. Looking at our one other option here is Gafford for Washington. Now, he hasn't played a consistent minutes throughout the season, as he's been anywhere from 15 to 30. If you can get on the higher end of that, then he's going to draw some potential here, though it is a tough matchup. His price is purely purely based on the fact that he's had 3 big games and he's had 4 games that have been crappy. And if you want to run him in a GPP lineup, then he's definitely in play here on DraftKings. But he's definitely avoidable on cash games. You just don't want to use him because of that risk. And his upside is not high enough for that kind of situation. Looking at Toronto here, this is where we're going to start to get some decent options. Scotty Barnes is a core play for me. His price has popped up as a result of his play, but his only bad game was against Boston in the last game. Washington won't defend like Boston did, and he should return to form here. A 45 fantasy point game is definitely in the cards, but he should be able to get it in the 50s on this one. Obviously, with the price increase, that does give him some risk, but he is capable, especially on a small slate. He's one of my favorite pay up options on the slate in general. Over on FanDuel, he's a little bit more expensive, but he definitely has more output upside as well as his ceiling is getting a boost here on FanDuel due to the way that they calculate the stats. So he's definitely a core play over on FanDuel as well. Then we're going to look at Dennis Schroeder for Toronto. Now, his price is still pretty good, though it is up. But he's been playing pretty well, and this matchup does give him roster upsides, and he's very rosterable at this price point, especially because he's not too expensive. So, if he can get in the mid-30s fantasy-wise, which he's definitely capable of doing, his really only super bad game was against Boston the last game, and so he definitely has good potential, though, here, as this should be a pace-up game, and he should be able to have some opportunity. The only super risk here, really, is if they just blow them out and then he doesn't play as many minutes. But I still think that he's going to be a top-tier option. Over on FanDuel, he's nearly the same price. The floor is a little bit lower on FanDuel than DraftKings, but he still carries value on the plus matchup. He just doesn't feel as safe as some of the other players. And then we are going to look at Siakam over on FanDuel, as his price is a little bit cheaper than it is on FanDuel. On DraftKings, I am showing him here, but I don't really think he's that rosterable here on DraftKings at his price. He's just cheaper on FanDuel by about a few $100s, and he's got a higher floor and an easy matchup. We know he's capable of blow-up games, so he's definitely possible for that, but he definitely carries the fact that he's only had one blow-up game so far this season, and so he is viable on FanDuel much more so than DraftKings. And then we're going to get into the Chicago game here. So Chicago does face a tough matchup against Milwaukee, but they have some guys that are in play. Now, we'll start with Zach LaVine. Now, the injury report for this team is Caruso is questionable. If he were to miss, that would definitely help some of their starters and Kobe White and stuff, as well as LaVine. As for LaVine, his price is still pretty fair. It has come up a little bit, but he did let us down yesterday, too, against Detroit. But Detroit does tend to be a weird team to play against. And, of course, Chicago's been very inconsistent this season. I expect them to come out here and have a better game, even though it is a tougher matchup. Milwaukee is battling some injuries, and they won't have Crowder, who's their best defensive player. And so I look for him to have some potential in this one. Obviously, the fast-paced nature of the game does give him some more upside as well. And he does feel like a GPP option on the slate. Over on FanDuel, he's actually $100 cheaper. He does carry similar upside there, and feels like a GPP play as well, so he's definitely in play. Then we're going to look at Vucevic for Chicago. Now, Vucevic has been very good. When he gets double-doubles, he tends to score a lot of fantasy points. He's been somewhat inconsistent this year, as he has had some games where he doesn't score a ton of real points. But if he can score 15 or more real points and get the same level of rebounds and assists, then he should be fine here. He's also been very good against Milwaukee last season, so I look for him to do well there. His price was higher by this point last season too. So, sorry, against I don't know what sorry, against Milwaukee. I don't know why I wrote Toronto in here, but he's been very good against Milwaukee last season. So I look for him to have another good game here against that team, and he's priced pretty fairly here, as he does have that 50 fantasy point upside. Last season, in the 4 matchups against Milwaukee, he had 45 or more fantasy points in 3 of the 4, and he also had 33 fantasy points in the 4th one. So even his floor against this team last year was very good. So I really like his upside here, and he does draw a lot of potential. Over on FanDuel, he's also similarly priced and has just as much upside. His floor is actually higher on FanDuel, and that does give him some more upside here. He's very close to a top-tier play on FanDuel at the center position. Then we'll look at DeRozan. Now, he's squarely up DraftKings play here, as his price is just considerably cheaper, and that gives him a lot of upside. His floor has been really good so far this year, though his price is kind of creeping up a little. As long as it remains under $8,000, he's somebody to consider. Really, under $7,500 makes him nearly a great play. He's somebody I like to roster a lot because he tends to be pretty consistent, and he's been playing very well in fourth quarters, especially in the closer games, because he tends to turn it up there. And that should be a type of situation today, assuming that the Milwaukee doesn't get up ahead too much. But I still think that this game will be closer than it probably looks, and that will give him some potential here. Looking at our last but not least is Kobe White for Chicago on this team. Now he's nice and cheap here. He does tend to be streaky, but this price is still cheap, and he's had 5 straight good fantasy point outputs here on DraftKings, including 3 straight over 30 fantasy points. And if Caruso were to miss, then that would give him a little bit of a boost as well. The Bulls have been inconsistent, but he is doing well, and he's one of the few guys that seems to really be pouring in the stats the last few games. So I really like his upside in this matchup, and that does give him some rosterability. Over on FanDuel, he's virtually the same price. He feels like more of a GPP play there than he does on DraftKings, but he still has some potential, so I do like him. Looking at the next team here, the Milwaukee Bucks. This is going to be a hard team to roster today, especially with Lillard looking like he's going to be back. He is probable now, and it looks like Middleton will play as well. So this is going to be a harder team to work out because a lot of their guys are priced up. Since Lillard's been out, Crowder's also missing, so that will give Connaughton a little bit of a boost probably. And even Bobby Portis, but it's still really hard to figure out who you would even want to use here. The only guy I'm really super into is Lillard at this point on FanDuel. Not so much on DraftKings because he's about $600 cheaper on FanDuel. And as long as he's full strength and ready to go, full complement of minutes, he should have some utility there. Though there are plenty of point guards available on that site. As for DraftKings and FanDuel, Bobby Portis is really the only guy that has some upside, though he does carry some risk in a tougher matchup here, and he does come off the bench, and his minutes have been inconsistent this season. So really hard to roster Milwaukee despite the fact that they're in a plus situation on the slate. Looking at the Cavs, this is a team I do like and think there's some utility here. We'll start with Jarrett Allen here for Cleveland. Now, he's just a little bit too cheap here on DraftKings at $5,700. I can't click him for some reason. There we go. His minutes are slowly ramping up, and he does have some favorability here. He hasn't had a double-double yet, but he's been in double figures in points in every game he's played so far. And as he ramps up and gets more minutes, he should get some more opportunity for those double-doubles. He could be kind of a sneaky value-ish play today, and he looks like a really fun option on the slate, especially on a smaller slate like this. That'll just keep in mind he's really not viable on FanDuel, where he's significantly more expensive and has a lower floor. Looking at other options here, Donovan Mitchell is actually underpriced here on DraftKings. He's a little bit overpriced on FanDuel, so do keep that in mind. But while he tends to be inconsistent, the prices come down some, actually the lowest of the season, and that makes him very rosterable on a smaller slate. The usage is there, and he's had 2+ steals in the last few games. He's had 2 or more steals in every game but 2 off season so far, so he definitely draws some potential here to have a big game, and the matchup is actually pretty good. Sacramento is a faster paced team, and that gives him some utility. He's also been good against them in the past, so that gives him upside. Over on FanDuel, he is rosterable, but he's $700 more expensive. His floor tends to be a little bit tougher on FanDuel as well, and his ceiling does remain high, though. Then we're going to look at Darius Garland for them as well. Now, he does have some utility here on DraftKings at his price. He's missed some games, but in the games he's played, he shot at least 11 shots in every single one of those games, and he's getting a lot of peripheral stats as well. I think Okoro being out actually gives him a little bit of a boost. His price is a little bit tougher, but he does have potential in this game, and he's kind of hard to ignore simply because of his price range, especially on a small slate like this, so he's definitely a viable candidate. On FanDuel, he's a little bit more expensive, but he's similar to Mitchell, that he's borderline on FanDuel due to his price being a bit higher, and he has a lower floor, but he is capable with his steal upside as well. So looking at the Kings, last but not least here, this team is going to be interesting to roster today, especially if Fox misses. He is currently doubtful, but if he does play, then that would definitely change up a lot. But it doesn't look like he'll play today, and that will look like Keon Ellis is going to get into being the starting point guard again. Now, he is a little bit, his price has come up some on DraftKings, which isn't to say much. He's still $3,900. In his first start against Portland, he did not do very well, but in his second game against Oklahoma City, he actually had a pretty solid game. I'm going to point out that he's had at least 3 blocks or steals in the 2 games that he started so far, so that does hurt his fantasy output a little bit because he's probably not going to do that again. But he is playing decently well. The only real concern here really is his assist numbers are virtually non-existent so far, and so I would like to see him get some assists here, but he is able to get into double figures in scoring, as he did in the game that he played more minutes against Houston, which got him in the starting lineup. He is definitely a contrarian option, but he's high risk, high reward, as he could definitely have a blow-up game and score over in the mid-20s or so, and he's definitely capable of that. Over on FanDuel, he actually looks close to a near must-play because he's played. His ceiling is a little bit higher there, and his floor is higher because they do give good fantasy points there. So he's also minimum price there at $3,500, so that he definitely gives some utility, and he can play shooting guard, which is a little bit tougher on FanDuel today, whereas he's stuck at point guard on DraftKings. Then we're going to look at Mr. Monk for Sacramento. Now, he has been absolutely phenomenal since Fox has been out. He's had one bad game against Houston, but if we ignore that, he's been pretty close to 5xing at this particular price, which is obviously higher. And most games, he's coming off the bench, though, but his usage has been good, and his assist rate has actually been pretty high, which is really helping him when it comes to his fantasy output. Obviously making his price higher, but he's definitely a capable option. He is a core play because I think he's going to be highly rosterable today. And if he has a monster game, which he is definitely capable of, as he's had a few of them already this season, then he'll probably be in a perfect lineup on the slate. So he's definitely somebody to consider. Over on FanDuel, he's nearly the same price, and he actually has a higher floor than DraftKings, so that gives him even more utility there, and he's definitely a core play there as well. Another guy I'm going to look at is Kevin Huerter. Now, I'm going to keep in mind that Sacramento tends to be a little bit inconsistent with which guys like jump off and have great games, but as long as Fox is out, his usage has been up as a result of Fox being out the most of any other player, sans Sabonis, and that does give him some utility on the slate. His price is still pretty good here at $5,900, and so even though he does have a low floor, he definitely has a usage boost with Fox out, but I still think Monk is a little bit safer, but he's a good contrarian off Monk, and he's virtually the same price. Over on FanDuel, he's about the same price as well, and, pretty much the entire situation is the same, as Monk is a little bit safer, but Huerter definitely has some utility on the slate. And then looking at our center and Sabonis, obviously his usage has popped up as a result of Fox being out. Now, he's had a couple off games, especially in the blowout loss to Houston, but I look for this game to be pretty close, and he's going to have a pretty good matchup here against Cleveland. Even though they do have some tough defensive players in the paint, he's been able to get double-doubles in every single game aside from that Houston blowout. And as long as this game stays relatively close, he's going to have a lot of potential for upside. And his assist numbers have actually risen slightly as a result of Fox being out as well, which gives him some more utility. And his price, though it is high, he's definitely rosterable on the slate. Over on FanDuel, his floor is a little bit lower than it is on DraftKings, but he still has good upside for this team, and I think he's got a great opportunity as he dominated them last season in the few games he played for over 50 fantasy points a game on both slates. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. Comment and question below what you think about how I did the video today. Let me know what you think, and have a nice day, guys.